Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Eran Thomson, the Joy Pusher, a communication specialist, director, writer, podcaster, octopotentialite, game inventor, founder and CEO of PowerProv, a creator of the Song Saga tabletop game, which is going to be interesting to talk about later too, founder of Laugh Masters Academy, creative director, wordsmith, and idea machine. So thanks for coming on the Polycast.
Hi, Dustin. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I love those long intros because it's just one of those things where it's showing all the different aspects to your life.
Yeah, I heard you say that with someone else. You were like, yeah, I know it's going to be a good chat because we're not going to run out of stuff to talk about. So yeah, that's
right.
probably accurate. Yeah.
Well, this is a show by PolyInnovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hello, innovators. I appreciate your determination, your fortitude, your stamina, your willingness to go hard when other people might say no. Keep fighting the good fight. Dream your dream.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. For sure, that's already motivational. I love it. We're here to talk about his various companies, projects, and overall life as a person with so much potential and has done something with it. So the way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Yeah. I love this question. There's a version of it too I love, which is, what's something that people can't tell about you by looking at you? I like that version of it too. So I guess there's a funny one and there's a serious one. So the serious one is I'm a cancer survivor. Most people don't know that about me. It's been something that happened that I went through so long ago as a young adult that people who know me often forget that I had that experience. And so it doesn't really affect my life on a day-to-day basis other than the sort of perceptual changes and, attitudinal changes that come with that sort of experience. So that's one. And then the other one, which is funny, is that after 2 or 3 beers, I'm an unstoppable freestyle rapper. So don't put me on the spot and ask me to rap now because I haven't had any beers. It's only 11 a.m. here. But
it's not too early. But
yeah, give it some time. Maybe I'll crack one open. But yeah, I got good flow.
Yeah, it's funny because I do have plans for like sequel interviews. So the round 2 rapid fire polycast or like a triple threat where it's like multiple people at once. Maybe for one of those, if I have you back on, we'll have a beer and then do that.
Yeah, I can just start slamming on people.
Especially since like the idea behind a triple threat too is to have people with similar knowledge areas but also disparate as well, and then taking their different experiences and kind of clashing. So if you could freestyle rap too, that would be like, whoa, okay, I can't really compete with that.
I could rap my whole interview standing in front of you.
There you go.
People be asking themselves, how do he do what he do? I don't know. Okay, we're going to delete that.
No, I'm definitely keeping that. I am definitely keeping that.
All right.
So what was your mindset 5 years ago and how have you changed since then?
Oh man, 5 years ago. It's such an interesting question because so many times people go, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I love the idea of the gap and the gain and being able to take the opportunity to kind of reflect on where you've come. And often that very simple question can help you realize your own personal growth and achievement, which sometimes we're blind to. Like other people see it, but you often don't give yourself the chance to reflect and discover it for yourself or recognize it for yourself. So I like this. 5 years ago, I was in a really different place emotionally, spiritually, personally, professionally. It was a challenging time. So I was sort of transitioning slowly out of a career in advertising where I'd spent most of my professional life as a copywriter and a creative director and an agency founder. And then I had this sort of idea that after spending a previous career in advertising where so much of what we do is create value and momentum for other people's brands, services, and products, that in a world where so many of those things are becoming more and more homogenized, could we use those skills that we've acquired to develop our own brands, products, and value? And so I started a business with another guy where our whole objective was to sort of look for industries that we felt were too big to change quickly, weren't adapting to the way the world works today, weren't digital first, and just trying to go, where are the opportunities in the world? And we looked at a bunch of different things, of course, a bunch of different types of mobile apps and products and services. And while we were doing that, people came became aware of what we were doing and started coming to us and going, hey, I hear what you guys are doing. Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And one of the things that they came to us for was, one of the suggestions that came to us was superannuation, which for your listeners outside of Australia or the UK, superannuation is basically kind of a combination of 401k meets Social Security, right? It's retirement savings, retirement income that gets invested for most of your working life that you hopefully have a substantial sum to retire on when you're older. And so we went down a path of starting a superannuation business. And anyone who knows me was like, dude, what? You know, like you're this, you're this creative brain, you know, who's, you know, always innovating and ideating and coming up with stuff. And now you're in a fintech. Like, what's the connection? And so, and you know, when I talk about the change in mindset and perspective, so much of it was formed during the 3 years that we launched. It was called Zuper, that business, Zuper Superannuation. We launched Zuper and then got Zuper to market, became revenue generating, and then sold it. And yeah, it was a massive, painful, challenging learning curve inside that business. And that was 3 years of the last 5 years. And then coming out of the other side of that, to finish my answer to your question, I think there was a lot of continued personal development growth I needed to go do as a result of having made the decision to be involved in a fintech in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a massive 5 years of personal change and self-awareness and getting more back in touch with my authentic self and focusing on my true core skill sets.
So much to go off of there. And one thing I want to mention first is, like, when you had the interview with Perry, I remember you guys talking about how we have to write things down as people who do these kind of, like, just diverse minds. And writing things down also includes reflecting, writing down your reflections over the past year and previewing what the next year is going to be about. And the way you explained the past 5 years too was really interesting. It's like you said, a lot of people think, where are you going to be in 5 years? Thinking future sense. What is the last 5 years like for you? And how have you changed? And those are very past and future, but we also need to be in the present. Like, how did that become who we are today? And I think the way you answered that really kind of exemplified that, which is awesome. The other thing was a topic I talk about on here is the 4 pillars philosophy, the mind, body, spirit, and emotions, and how those 4 areas of life come together. And you were alluding to a lot of those as well when you were mentioning your story.
Yeah, mind, body, spirit, and what was the 4th one?
Emotions.
Emotion. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Those are all important things to pay attention to, and arguably all. You could argue that they're all sort of one thing, really, depending on your perspective, right? Like they're not necessarily separate things. They're facets of what make us a whole human, right? Or a whole spirit having a human experience. So, yeah, I totally get. I'm on board with that stuff.
Well, and I didn't necessarily prompt a question there because I was curious to see what your brain would come up with when you were just kind of hearing those words, and the way you responded too was a great way of going about it. So thank you. And it was very improvised, and so it leads me to the next question pretty well too. Where do you see improv coming in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I've had an interesting relationship with improv and improvisation. It started almost a little over 10 years ago, and at that point in my life, I was very much interested in transitioning out of advertising and more into entertainment. I was working as a writer and a screenwriter and a director. And I was over in Los Angeles. I'm based in Sydney now, but I was over in Los Angeles for 3 months where I was writing a screenplay for a director over there. And while I was there, and you know, there's certain cities where improv is just sort of in the culture, and LA is one of them, Chicago's another one, New York to a certain degree is another, Toronto. You know, and there's a culture of improvisers, and you know, I tapped into that when I was in LA for the reasons that I thought taking an improv class would make me a better writer, which it did, and that it would make me better at working with actors, which it also did. But it was never my intention to be on stage as a performer, you know. But I did think I was funny. You know, I am the friend who people think is funny, and I thought because of that, I was going to go into my improv class and like literally, I remember thinking like, I'm going to rule improv. You know, I'm going to be the funniest dude in there. I'm going to kick ass.
Confidence.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to be great at this. And so I took my first class at a place called the Second City, which is a famous institution of improvisational training. And I walked in there and I had that kind of attitude. And first class happened. Came back next week for the second class, and probably like about halfway through the second class, I realized that I was the asshole. Every class has an asshole, and I was it. And I was like, oh no, I'm being an asshole. It's because I realized something so important, which most people don't realize about improv, which is it's not about trying to be funny. Improv is about being present, being aware, staying in the moment, responding to the last thing that's been said authentically. And the comedy most often comes, especially with young performers, from recognition in an audience of truth, right? Truth in comedy is a set of words that exist for a reason. And so when I realized that in that class, it was a massive pivotal shift for me. So all of a sudden I stopped trying to be funny, and I kind of just went to, beginner's mindset and was like, okay, this is not what I thought it was. And so if it's not what I thought it was, then what the hell is it? Right. Yeah. And how do I just make the rest of the people in the room not think I'm the asshole anymore? Right. So, and be a team player. Right. And just do what's being asked of me. So that was a really transformational moment. And what I fell in love with in that class was the soft skills that come out as a byproduct of improvisational training, right? Eye contact, active listening, physical body language, learning to be present and aware, communication skills, innovation skills, all that kind of stuff that is vital for us to succeed as humans. That got my attention. And so when I came back to Sydney, I finished the screenplay, came back to Sydney, Australia. I wanted to keep going, and there was no one here that was teaching improv at the level that I was getting trained at Second City. And so very naively, I started flying people out from the States to do weekend workshops. And, one thing led to another. And I ended up founding a comedy school called Laugh Masters Academy. And then off the back of that, founded a corporate training business that uses the fundamental philosophies of improvisation, translates them off the stage into a corporate context called PowerProv, which is all about helping teams innovate, collaborate, communicate, and obviously improve camaraderie as a byproduct.
For sure. And just even as you're talking there, you were mentioning the soft skills. And as a host, that's something I thought about like from the beginning. I was like, hey, you're a talker. Like, Dustin, you're going to talk. You need to be a person who's active listening. If you're going to be hosting someone on the show, you want to be a good host. And so you need to shut up and learn how to active listen. And so, like, just looking at the camera instead of looking at you, like, I want to look at you when you speak. But if I'm looking at the camera, for example, it shows you that I'm actually, like, looking at you. And so by your view, and by the people watching this view, it shows that I'm paying attention. That shows that eye contact, which is the best way we can emulate it, technically speaking. But, like, on top of that, too, just the soft skills behind it, and then beyond that, improvisation. The way you've been able to answer questions, for example, on this show. It's a pretty laid-back show, but it's still a pressure of like, hey, we're recording, this is going to go out. How are people respond to what I'm saying? And so you seem comfortable, but a lot of people necessarily won't know that. And they not necessarily know, here, we replace that. A lot of people won't necessarily feel as comfortable as you or something like that when they come on a show. So learning those soft skills ahead of time is important. And then on top of that, too, you're talking about the beginner's mind. That's something that came to mind before you even said it. I was like, wow, he really kind of reset himself there, and he was able to open himself up to all the new learnings.
Yeah, I mean, that is there's a joke about knowing so much you'll feel like a teenager again. Like we can get really, there's times in our lives when we feel super confident, like we know a lot or know everything. And, if there's anything I've learned in my lifetime is the more I know, the more I realize how little I know, right? And so... Yeah. That ability to reset and go, all right, what is this? And then for me personally, the evolution of that has been, it's not even that I don't know, it's that you have a different opinion, right? And being open to that, because how often do we shut down other people's ideas and opinions, or just typically associate with people who share similar beliefs as us, right? And so I think where that can be really interesting and powerful, and we've seen it in the community that's built around the school, is people from all walks of life, from all different backgrounds, all different belief systems come together, and they find this beautiful human common ground, because I think in the context of an improv class, a safe environment is created where people can reveal and release and appreciate their authentic selves in a kind of environment that doesn't exist in many other places. And I think that's why improv has such a cult-like following, around the world, because people kind of get a taste of that and they want more.
Well, I've always been intrigued by improv myself, never been able to really dive into it too much, but I feel like I will at some point in the future. What you were saying there made me think of multipotentialites and polymaths and people who are multidisciplinary as well, where we feel like we know a lot. There's often like this ego that's attached to the idea of a polymath, for example, where people think, oh, you're polymath, oh, you think you're better than us. Like, no, it's just a matter of identifying as someone who does many different things. And as people who are multipotentialites or people who do a lot of different things too, it's interesting to think about at one point, should we open up the beginner's mind? Because we're naturally inclined towards our curiosity. We delve into that very well, usually, at least from what I can tell from the people I've talked to. But there is the idea of like, we know a lot about a lot of different things. The ideas we know can translate to other knowledge, and so you could learn quicker. But when does that translation get cut off and you need to be in beginner's open mind to learn something new?
I mean, the easy answer is when you don't know something or you realize what you thought was wrong. I mean, yeah, I guess
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like you referred to the conversation I had with Perry earlier, and so you and he both mentioned something which was sort of new to me, which was that there's a possible perception by people who are not polymaths or multipotentialites or nonlinear thinkers, right? Who they kind of look at that group of people, which we're both in, and go, oh, you guys, like you think you're special, you think you're cool, or as Perry puts it, like he's confident that people do, like specialists, singular specialists, look at people like us and go, you're cool, right? You can do lots of interesting, cool stuff. I've never felt cool for that, right? In fact, I think if anything, I felt uncool, or judged, or looked at as like scatterbrained, unfocused, can't make up his mind, not doing, doing too many things, never going to get anywhere. The analogy of like trying to push multiple things across the table with all your hands, you're going to spill things and knock things over versus pushing one cup at a time. You've probably heard that. And so I never felt special, cool, or like awesome in my, even though I was living with this ability and an ever increasing skill set or toolbox of things I can draw from. So when the expression multipotentialite came on my radar through Emily Wapnick's now pretty famous TED Talk, I was like, oh, hey, that's an interesting box. Finally, that I can kind of fit in and not feel bad about. And so anyway, going back to your question about beginner's mind, I would say that, the obvious place is if you have enough self-awareness to realize you don't know something, there's two choices there, right? One is decide that you want to learn, or decide to find someone who knows a lot about it and get them to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? Hire a specialist.
Yeah,
right?
I've talked to a lot of people, and delegation seems to be something a lot of people think about. Even if you can do, like, for example, I can edit these videos really well. I love the research phase. I love these interviews. It's like catnip for me. I'm a socialite person. I love these conversations, but the editing, like, I'm really good at it. I just don't like doing it. It's tedious, and that's something I could delegate to someone else. And it's just one of those things where I think that that's an interesting dynamic there. Like, should you do it yourself, or should you learn that new thing? These are decisions we have to make, and they're not necessarily things that people think about. Even if, like, these non-linear thinkers like us, we don't often think about them until time happens or it's too late or something like that.
And it's and the other thing too, Dustin, is like, we live in a world right now where I don't know how to edit these videos. I'm just going to Google it, YouTube. Mm-hmm. There's someone on YouTube with a video who's figured out how to solve the exact same problem you're struggling with in your editing. And now you can figure out how to do it, and that's, I want to play guitar. I want to, learn how to get a high score in Tetris. Like, it doesn't matter what it is you think you want to learn. You can get online and find someone who will teach you those skills. This is wonderful, right? Because knowledge is accessible to everyone around the world. It's also terrible because you can send yourself down a rabbit hole of spending 3 or 4 days learning how to use a new piece of editing software when really you would be much more further along in your goals, ambition, and journey if you just focused on getting more great guests for your podcast, right? And doing the bit that, as you said, gives you the juice. So yeah, it's an interesting time, right? Where we have access to all this knowledge, and the temptation to jump in and absorb it all can be a challenge.
So you mentioned like a box too, and as a multidisciplinary person, being put in a box often makes us uncomfortable. Although having that box to identify with is still nice. What sort of personal boxes do you like, or rather like spheres of interlacing areas, if you will?
That's interesting. I mean, I guess I guess one way I could answer. I mean, for me, everything's about ideas, innovation, creativity, right? That's my happy space. But more broadly, one of the things that I noticed in my career when I kind of was like looking back over the last few years and trying to figure out how to repackage myself out into the world, sort of was like a personal rebranding exercise that I went through. And, I've done all these disparate things. And for me, initially, even for myself, I was struggling to find what's the connection point? What was it that I got excited about? Why did I say yes to these things? And then I realized a couple things. One is, I'm passionate about potential, right? Anything that's got legs, I want to see those legs stretch and run fast and long. And so I get really, really excited about what an idea can be. This is dangerous, right? And then the other thing, which my wife pointed out, where she goes, the through line for everything that you've ever done is joy, right? It's about bringing joy and happiness to people, whether that's through funny advertising that makes people laugh, through a superannuation fintech that helps people have more money to enjoy their lives with, whether it's a party game that gets people feeling more connected to their friends and family. Like, joy is the cornerstone of all those different endeavors. And I sort of was nodding my head going, okay, yeah, I guess so. It hasn't always felt joyful to me, but I can kind of see that. And she goes, you're like a joy pusher. And I was like, that's cool, right? And so then I felt like I just adopted that and took that and kind of rebranded myself as the joy pusher. And now that's enabled me to look at any other future projects I might take on and go, does this bring joy to the world? Yes, no. That's the first criteria, right? And then the second question is, to my wife, can I start another thing? And the answer is usually no.
But do you do it anyways?
No, I got enough on my plate. I feel like actually, one of the things that, about multipotentialites, one of the definitions of multipotentialism that I've read and you can find online when you look for it, is that it's people who are interested in a lot of things. And for me, that's everyone, right? So there needs to be a deeper distinction there. And so how I define it is people who are interested in a lot of things and have skill in those things, right? Because otherwise, you're just a person who's curious, right? And I think hopefully we're all curious, and probably people should be more curious. You get interested in all these things and you can develop skill in those things, which I think is a crucial distinction between how we define multipotentialism and a broader definition. But also, there's a danger zone, and I joked about it before with my wife saying, no, don't do any new things. And that is because for me personally anyway, there's a reality, which is, as much as you're interested in multiple things, as good as you may be at managing multiple things, there is a limit to what you can do if you're trying to push a whole bunch of things forward, right? Mm-hmm. And at some point you need to find focus and not necessarily specialize, but you need to just kind of go, this is the thing I'm putting energy into right now, and I'm going to make real noticeable progress on this. And so for me, right now, I've got a superannuation got sold, so that's off my plate now, so I don't have to think about that anymore. The school is transitioning to new ownership, so soon I won't have to think about that anymore. The corporate training business sort of runs itself, so that's kind of slowly drifting off my plate. Now I'm focused on the game and I'm focusing on writing. Still two things, but I've narrowed it down. And I think that process has been super important for me personally to kind of go, okay, it's if you really want to make stuff happen meaningfully, it does take a little bit of focus. And interestingly enough, someone said to me, oh, so you're trying to narrow everything down and just focus on one thing. That's great. But then they said, but with the game, which I guess we'll talk about later, but with Song Saga, it's a party game for adults. It's kind of like storytelling and music. Cards Against Humanity meets Desert Island Discs. But the card game is the cornerstone of a whole entertainment ecosystem that includes live events, a podcast, TV show, a mobile app, right? So even just in the sphere of that single thing, that multipotentialite brain gets to play, right? And do a lot of different things. And I think that is an important thing for people to remember, that just because you're focused doesn't mean you can't go wide. You can't be divergent in the things that you explore.
It's a very, very astute comment there. And I think that one of my favorite micro podcasts I made was this idea of micro and macro focus. Understanding, like, what are you doing day to day? What are you doing on a year to 5 years span as well, or quarterly, however, like we mentioned earlier, reviewing too, but understanding like the big picture. Okay, and this year you're going to be working on Song Saga and working on some new endeavors and closing out old endeavors. Like, those are like the main things, but what are you working on this week, this month? And I was watching an interview, I think, with MKBHD, who was interviewing Mark Zuckerberg. And he somehow got him on the show. It was like a 20-minute interview, so it wasn't very long, but he was able to talk about his life. And Mark is working on 3 different companies. He's often like you, where you're just divergent in all these different poles, all these different cookie jars, if you will. And he mentioned how he tries to focus on one thing per week. And that's how he focuses. Like, he focuses, or one thing per day even. Like, just tries to get that one thing done really well. And then that's how he's able to be polymathic or multipotentialite and actually express that divergentness, because he's able to focus on one thing for that day and get something done.
It's a good strategy. I'm down to try it. I have tried things like that in the past, time blocking, calendar chunking, kind of focus times. And what I found so far in my endeavors to do that is, I'll have I look at my calendar right now. There's a big chunk writing that I was supposed to do this morning. But but this morning, writing for me means writing I'm working on a book project, right? So I should be writing that book, but instead I'm writing blog posts for Song Saga. So I'm still writing, but I fooled myself, and I'm actually just still playing in the Song Saga world. So somehow, there's I don't know, let me ask you, do you struggle with that self-control to stay on task when you assign yourself those specific ideals or goals?
All the damn time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right.
Ironically, years back, I talked to this life coach for a short moment, and one of the things he passed on to me is the idea of time blocking. And at the time, it seemed so foreign. I knew about it, but it seemed so foreign and so out of reach that I didn't even get anywhere close to being able to adopt it to daily life. But a few years prior to that too, I was sitting there thinking, like, I want to do courses, I want to do podcasts, I want to listen to podcasts, I want to do Duolingo, meditate, exercise, eat well, do all these different habits that needed to be happening on a daily, if not multiple times a week basis. And I'm like, how do I incorporate all this into my life? And I realized that, like, you really can't at first, like, unless you're really good at them, where you can like make it into micro habits, you can't do all of them at once per se. But I learned how to become a really good self-learner and learn quickly. I used Duolingo for a long time so I can do it quickly. I learned how to speed read. I learned how to do all these different things. And with these new skills, I can now do those things. Do I?
Right.
Not so much yet, but I'm on that right path. I think that's the key.
That's cool. Yeah. Also, at the core of everything you just shared is self-awareness, right? Going, all right, I want to do these things. I'm not doing these things. What do I need to do to learn to so I can get closer to doing those things? That's great. Going back to an earlier part of our conversation, one of the things that I love, there's a guy, he's like a personal development coach. His business is called Strategic Coach. His name is Dan Sullivan. And he has a thing that he talks about who, not how, which I love, right? And this is going back to how do you get shit done, right? And it's like, sometimes you can't do everything and you need help. And it's really important to understand when to delegate, how to delegate, whether it's editing your podcast or something else. And this who, not how approach, while sounding simple, is a really powerful tool to move things forward and start getting the things done that you want to get done, right? Because sometimes you don't have to do it. Things just need to get done, right? So if I'm time blocking time and I'm using that time for other things, that means whatever I put in that block is probably, for whatever reason, not something that I'm eagerly jumping at, right? And it could be because I'm not really the right person to do it, or I'm procrastinating because I don't have, we procrastinate for a reason, right? Which is usually we don't have information or a skill we need to do that task, right? And so that's the other thing people can take away, which is delegate, who, not how. And also, if you're procrastinating, figure out what it is that you haven't got. It's usually knowledge or a skill. And if it's skill, you can outsource. If it's knowledge, you can figure it out.
well, maybe it's not the right time. Like maybe we'll get a little metaphysical there, but maybe there's a certain esoteric aspect behind it where like maybe you needed to do it later in life or something like that. Like I've been writing books for years, but have I finished them? No, but I've been adding to them over the years and putting it on that slow burner. And in the book you were mentioning earlier, is that the near-death experience book?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
How's that coming along?
It's good. I'm having a lot of fun writing it. It's sort of ridiculous. It's based on a comedy show, a one-man comedy show I put on as part of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival 2 years ago now. And basically it's just a compendium of all the times I've had a really, 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 really close call. Not necessarily all near-death experiences like white light, seeing God at the gates, but it's just full of funny stories and anecdotes from my life where things have gone really wrong. And then I sort of chart those out so that at the end you can sort of, you're left with an amalgamated table of things that are dangerous in life to watch out for, and what ages or periods of your life you might want to pay more attention to those things than others, right? Like alcohol and drugs when you're young,
Yeah.
Slow drivers when you're old, that kind of thing.
That's curious. And it's really macro view too. You're taking that like overall holistic view of it.
Yeah, it's a fun project.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, like being able to take those experiences and share it with other people. And you're alluding to the Song Saga earlier, and I wanted to know what was the origin behind that.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So Song Saga, like I said, it's a party game for adults. It's gets in what it is. It's a box full of cards, and the cards are most of the cards in the box are designed to spark memories of the music and moments that have meaning to you. And so people pull a card out, they get inspired by that card. It makes them think of a time in their life. And there's such a great connection between memory and music. We've all seen probably videos of people listening to music and how that can spark memory. This is built into the game, or baked into the game, which I love. And it's basically an experience that allows people to share authentic stories and the music they love. So every time you play, you're learning new things about your friends, even your closest friends, and you're building a killer playlist. So
Yeah.
it's a really fun game. One of my favorite testimonials, we just got it last week. Someone said, "I learned more about my husband in one night of playing Song Saga than in all the years we've been married." And I was just like, "Wow, that's awesome!" Right? So.
Yeah.
So it is playful. It can be silly, but it also really drives deeper human connection, which I love. And the origin story is I'll try and tell the condensed version of the origin story. But basically, going back like maybe 10 years ago, Steve Jobs famously came out with the very first iPod, right? And he was like, 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? And everybody was like, ooh, right? Well, now we have all the songs in our pocket, right? 60 million songs. I can pull any of them up right now on Spotify or Apple Music, Amazon Music, whatever it is, right? We all of us have this, right? It's not just like me, music maven, who friends look to hear new music. No, we all have it. We all have the world's biggest music library. And I just thought this was incredible moment in history, and wouldn't it be cool if you could gamify that or do something interesting with that? So this was just sitting in my head, percolating away as an abstract thought. And then we went away for a long weekend with some friends, and we're sitting around drinking some wine, listening to music, talking shit. And it so happened that weekend was the anniversary of my father-in-law's passing. And so my wife said, "Hey guys, do you mind if I play a song that reminds me of my dad?" And we were like, "No, of course." So she plays the Beatles, Sunshine. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, right? And so we listened to this song, and she tells this beautiful story about coming home from after school to see her dad. He was a woodworker. He had a separate wood shop, and she would go to the wood shop, and he would have his record collection and his record player out there so that he could play the music loud without bothering anyone at home. And she would go there, and they would dance in the sawdust and hang out together and listen to music. And it was like, wow, what a great memory, and also a great song, right? Yeah. And then another one of our friends was like, "Well, hey, I have a song that reminds me of my dad." And she shared a story of growing up in a really almost cult-like religious household, and as a teenager, kind of struggling with that and trying to find her own way and her own path, and eventually running away from home, and the fallout with her father as a result of that. And then she played REM's "Losing My Religion." And we were all like, "Whoa, heavy, right? Amazing!" Like, and then I shared a story about hearing my dad upstairs fixing something in a bathroom, like hammering away, and he hit his thumb, and he was swearing, and he didn't know I was in the house, and I thought that was hilarious, and it reminded me of this Cat Stevens song about who he's singing about a relationship between father and son. And then our other friend shared a song, which was the comedic coup d'etat that we need, or coup de grace that we needed, which was he's like, well, my favorite song that I remember from my dad is when we were when I was a little kid and he would wash me in the bathtub, and the song was like, spaghetti time, we all are dirty, we get in the tub and get clean, or whatever it was, like it was just something silly, something ridiculous. And we were all just cracking up. And in that moment, what I realized was, wow, we've all known each other for a long time. These are 4 things that we have all shared about ourselves that none of us knew. We've discovered some new music, and we're inspired to continue to look for other prompts. So I think high school dance was like the next thing. We're like, all right, high school dance, what do you got? And we just kept going around all night, sharing songs, sharing stories. And I came home from that weekend and I was like, this is it. And so, and from that night to a finished prototype, prototype took me, took about a month to get a box made, to write the game, create the game, and get the box made. And then it probably took another year to figure out how that industry works in the world and get it to market in a meaningful way.
Whew. Okay. So much to go off of there. For one, I will say too, music's such a powerful aspect of human existence, and understanding that too is always such a fantastic mindset to keep. And one of the recent guests on the show, we were talking about free zone, which is that like tingling sensation, the hair standing up in your skin when you hear a song. It just makes you feel something. There is a Ode to Joy flash mob over in, I think, Prague or something like that, and every time I see it, it gives me chills, even though I've seen it countless times. Or there's a song in a video game where the triumphant soundtrack starts to kick in, you know what's going to happen in the game, because if you play it, like, you're like, wow, everyone could die if you're not careful in this particular story. Right. And so like it's a very momentous occasion. And this makes me think that the power of music really inspires people. And one other thing I wanted to mention too, I think that the iPod, when he did that speech, was almost like 20 years ago.
Oh man, okay.
I just wanted to mention that because I thought I was like, oh crap, now I feel old. But that's amazing, and I'm glad. I thank you for sharing those stories too. It's fantastic to think about, and it seems like a positive alternative to Cards Against Humanity too, because like Cards Against Humanity kind of brings out the horse of us, where Song Saga probably brings out some of the best.
That's interesting. Look, I will go on the record as saying I'm a huge fan of Cards Against Humanity. I love that game. It was only when I started researching the game industry and going to conventions and fairs and talking to people who are in the game world professionally and have been for decades, did I realize that they all see Cards Against Humanity's success as a massive fluke, and B, there is a whole world of people who vehemently hate that game. Right. And I was like, wow, like, I was just like, I couldn't believe it. It just really surprised me that people would not like Cards Against Humanity. But one of the first playtesting groups that ever played Song Saga, they said, I love this. It's like Cards Against Humanity, but I can play it with my parents and I can play it with my teenage kids. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll take it. That's great. Yeah. And look, I think Cards Against Humanity is awesome. This is a different experience, right? Cards Against Humanity is really about being goofy, or as they say, horrible, right? It says right on their box, a party game for horrible people or something like that. Right. And this game is definitely 180 degrees from horrible, right? You can share a horrible story or a horrible experience or even a terrible song or a song that other people hate. But one of the things that comes from even doing just that is you share like your worst experience or a terrible story of something that horrible happened to you. We're going to feel closer, right? Because you've shared something intimate, and I'm empathetic, and I feel like I've gone through it with you, and I'm living that experience with you, where we are bonded over you sharing that story, whether it's intentional or not. It just is a natural byproduct of how we interrelate as humans. And then the second thing is if the song is terrible, if I hate that song, right, it doesn't matter, because now every time I hear that song, instead of I hate this song, I'm gonna be like, oh, this is that time Dustin had that horrible thing happen, right? You know? And it just reframes how you listen to music.
Well, and you're making that connection with that person, which releases that oxytocin in the brain, giving you joy and love, which again pushes that joy.
Totally. Yeah. The blog post I wrote this morning when I should have been writing the book was about how when you play, science proves that Song Saga is good for you, right? And it's the you get a double dopamine hit, right? You get, the first is the dopamine hit that comes from, this is the bit that I researched and was surprised by, from the dopamine hit that we get from social interaction, right? And right now, especially in the world today when we're all communicating over video instead of hanging out together in person, we're deprived of that juice in our brains, right? That dopamine that comes from being around each other physically. But music also delivers a dopamine hit, especially when we listen to music we love. And so when you're playing the game, you get this double hit, right? One from interacting, playing, connecting with people, and the other from listening to great music. So I think that's really cool. The oxytocin, dopamine, whatever all that stuff gets things firing up there.
How is it surviving as a multipotentialite, if you will?
How is it surviving as a multipotentialite? You make it sound like it's a disease. Is there a cure for multipotentialitis? Yeah.
It's called getting a degree and going into one job and being a specialist. Yeah,
I guess so.
No, I'm kidding.
Look, I mean, I've sort of alluded to some of the symptoms and cures earlier, right? One is that because I'm so passionate about potential and get excited about a lot of things easily, historically, I've jumped into things with a lot of optimism and naivete, right? Certainly Laugh Masters Academy and PowerProv are two businesses that would not exist today if it hadn't been for an astonishing amount of naivete and optimism, right? And learning what it takes to start a business, right? And that's, everybody has different things they're interested in and things that they want to do. For me, that's been a genuinely eye-opening, powerful learning curve, which is, ideas are valuable, right? Some people will say ideas are worth nothing. It's all about execution, right? But as one of my business coaches says, right, to get an idea off the ground and make it viable and exist in the world in a meaningful way, it's sort of like 30% idea, 30% execution, and 30% the money required to do it, right? And if you spend 30% if you spend that 30% of time and energy doing something, working on an idea, and 30% of the money funding an idea that's a bad idea, then you prove to yourself the value of a good idea, right? Mm-hmm. So I think when people say ideas have no value, that's a misnomer and shouldn't be accepted. In terms of surviving, I think the tricks for me have been, we touched on it early on, like making lists, right? Writing down, capturing ideas, capturing to-dos, scheduling tools, and if there's people around you in your life who can kind of help keep you on track or in check, that's a bonus, right? The deal, I jokingly said earlier, but I actually do have a straight up legit agreement with my wife, which is I will not start another business without her permission, right? And I had to get permission to launch Song Saga, right? And I don't know if I would have gotten it if she hadn't have been there that weekend I described, right? But yeah.
That's crazy. And I think it's interesting too, because it goes back to that idea of focus, like focusing on the good idea and not the bad idea per se. And granted, you not always know what idea is going to be bad or not, but granted, if you dig into that idea more and ask people and start reaching out, you can start processing the idea in new ways and start working on it that way. And you realize maybe it changes.
Yeah. Do you know who Mark Randolph is?
I recognize the name, but I can't think of him.
So Reed Hastings gets all the kind of like, he's the face sort of like of LinkedIn, but also Netflix. But Mark Randolph was the original founder of Netflix. And he had 5 startups that he worked on before Netflix. And obviously Netflix is a massive success and done really, really well, huge. But he just launched his own podcast. I think he's only like 7 or 8 episodes in. And one of the things I love about him is he is so good and so quick to take other people's ideas and go, here's how you test it and find out if it's legit before you start talking to VCs, before you build a website, before you start planning your mobile app. Don't do anything. Prove your idea works. Prove it has a market. Prove it people will pay for it. Then start doing shit. And it's his ability to do that is really astonishing. And I recommend that podcast to anyone who's out there thinking of starting an idea or thinks it has an idea. He'll give you some. I promise you, he'll give you some new ways of thinking about your idea that might just save you a whole lot of time and money.
I'll have to look into it. I actually watched, I've lost track how many documentaries or like stories about how Netflix was made and like how they've grown so much. And one of my projects that I work on is called this modular degree, which is taking a innovative or modular approach to education and do it yourself almost in a way. And the way I wanted to go about it in the future is create this platform for it. And I think that having a Netflix-like algorithm for educational materials is a really interesting idea. Mm-hmm. Hopefully no one takes it before I can do it, but taking that idea there.
Yeah, that's cool.
So from communication specialist, founder, improv guru, podcaster, and more, how have you lived your interdisciplinary life? Which we touched on, but I want to ask clearly.
How have I lived my interdisciplinary life? What do you mean by that?
So people can necessarily say multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but someone like us who's living these different like skills. You have the skill of podcasting, you have the skill of presentation, you have the skill of improv, comedy, freestyle rapping. You have all these different skills. How do they all come together to form who you are?
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer to that would be, it kind of goes back to being the joy pusher, right? Like, if I look at what the common thread between all these seemingly disparate endeavors, joy sits at the heart of them all. So, and again, that's sort of become like my guiding principle now in terms of like how I approach new projects, new tasks. Like, is this going to bring joy to me? Is it going to bring joy to the world? Is it going to have a positive impact down the track, even if the task to bring it to life currently is painful or a struggle or a challenge, right? I don't know. Is that
what's the long answer?
What's the long answer? I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's good. I asked that question too because it gets people thinking about their lives in a multidisciplinary way. And I think you already do. You've already kind of identified yourself as a octo or multipotentialite. And I think this idea too of putting your hands in all different cookie jars is often labeled as bad. One thing I like to share a lot of is the jack of all trades phrase. People always say jack of all trades, master of none, but it continues as but oftentimes better than a master of one. And most people don't realize the full saying in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's this, the idea that I guess you call it idea synthesis, right? It's sort of like, because I'm interested and exposed to a lot of things and have had a lot of great different experiences professionally, personally, socially, I have that library of experiences and knowledge to pull from anytime. And the ability to kind of combine seemingly disparate experiences or knowledge and repackage them in a new way is how things get innovated, right? It's how problems get solved. It's how new ideas come out into the world. So I think for polymathic brains, that ability to synthesize multiple ideas and come up with new things is super, super powerful, right? I think also probably as a stereotype, rapid learning is a part of that too. Like, the more you learn, the better at learning you get. And so the more you can learn, right? It's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And then ultimately, probably the third thing would probably be like adaptability, right? Like, because we're comfortable and curious in multiple situations, it means that you can put us anywhere and we'll be like, okay, where are we? What's happening? What are our goals, objectives? What are the desired outcomes? How can we be useful and add value? And I think the idea synthesis, the ability to learn quickly and to be adaptable are part of what makes our brains valuable in a room, and the more quickly the world can understand that, especially HR professionals, right?
Yeah.
The better. I think the better for everyone.
The HR whole thing is a whole nother tangent, but I want to touch on the idea of trans-contextual thinking, being able to pull from many different areas and bring them together, the synergizing of, like what you're saying earlier. And it makes me go back to the idea of habits, too. Like, the habit of learning is something that we have to develop. The habit of adapting, too, is still a skill. Curiosity is a skill, and a lot of people think it's innate. But I was talking to Dave Burst, and he talks about how it is a skill. It's a muscle you have to form over just indulging in it. If you're curious about how to do a Rubik's Cube, or like you alluded to earlier, Tetris, you got to go and practice that. You have to indulge in your curiosity for that to really start building up. I wanted to learn how to do Tetris. It's actually something I practice a lot on. And I did the Tetris marathon game they had on their website, and I tried to get, like, I was really curious about how high I could go. How can I train my brain to be fast enough and react quick enough to do it? And I had to indulge in that. And once I did, it started bleeding into other areas too.
Did you get to 99, level 99?
I don't know. I mean, it was a marathon. I don't know if there was a level cap of 15. No, I think there was a 15, and then you can go past that. I got to the point where I was listening to Dragon Force Through Fire and Flames and playing at the same speed as the guitar. So I don't remember exactly what level I was at, but I was in flow state. So that's what I do recall.
I love that. I love that there's a song attached to that story. That's so cool. Yes. And that you remember it. That's awesome.
Well, that's something that'll come up in Song Saga too.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There was one other thing, yes. So you were mentioning earlier how, as a multipotentialite, there's a potential to do many things, but it's not really crucial until you have the skill set in those areas, the level of competency in those different areas. And something I've talked about a lot is the multidisciplinary spectrum that I've been creating, where it's talking about all these different names, so polymath, generalist, multi, whatever you want, per se, but putting it on a spectrum of levels of competency in areas of knowledge. So specialist is like over here where you have one specialty, but it's deep. Polymath is like over here with multiple different stuff, and generalist is kind of middle, multipotentialite kind of at the bottom. You have the potential to do many different things, but how much have you pursued those areas? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So the word multipotentialite, like as I touched on earlier, sort of came on my radar relatively recently. And I was delighted to learn that there was a term that could positively describe what had up until that for most of my life felt like an affliction or a problem that I needed to deal with, right? So I like that. The term that I like a lot is nonlinear thinkers, right? Mm-hmm. But it's sort of the mix. Polymath is a great term too. Polymath is good. You know, there's also in Australia because we love to abbreviate everything and create nicknames for everything. A person who's a multipotentialite or a polymath here might be referred to as a slashy, right?
Slashy.
So he's like a podcaster / creative director / musician / so you're a slashy, right? Which I like that. I like that a lot. But I think one of the things that's interesting for me is that multipotentiality, as I define it, goes beyond just having interest. It's about developing skill in those areas. And I think we touched on this earlier. And that's different than another term I hear thrown around, which is neurodiversity, right? And again, I had to learn all these terms because I was starting to get them confused and felt like that there was some crossover with some, but others didn't apply. And you hear in conversations about polymathic brains, nonlinear thinkers, multipotentialites, you also hear neurodiversity brought up. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure that what neurodiversity refers to is sort of people who have ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, those types of things, and that you can be neurodiverse and have an unusual way of thinking or even be a nonlinear thinker as a result of having those conditions, but that doesn't necessarily default you into being polymathic or a multipotentialite. And again, I feel like there's some confusion out there in the world about what all these different things mean.
That's a very good topic, actually, Eran. I've talked to a lot of people who I would consider polymathic, and I would talk to them on the show, and we talked about their lives, and some of them have either self or been medically diagnosed as ADHD. And I think that's a very interesting topic to think about there, because I think there's a lot of people who are misdiagnosed because they have this seemingly lack of focus, despite the fact they may actually be very productive or hyper-focused in some ways too. There's this idea of like they might be ADHD, but they could also just be multidisciplinary or polymathic, and they just want to pursue many different things. And because they can't fit into a box, that's what the box that people label them as. I think that's an interesting dynamic too.
Totally, I agree with you. And it starts, I think, at a very young age, right? Because when you get into school, I mean, you think about like kids, you know, you ask a 6-year-old kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, like, I don't know, I'm 6. Like, I want to be a fireman, duh. You know, like, and then you grow up and you're like, oh, I don't want to be a fireman, right? Like, but all throughout our school, like we're from a very young age, at least in, you know, westernized educational systems, right? What do you want to be? Find the thing that you can do, or your parents define it for you. Like you're going to be a doctor, lawyer, right? And then you kind of drive towards that thing, right? And yet I remember when I was in college, in fact, I took a year off between high school and college. And the reason I did that was all my friends were jumping into university, but none of them knew what they wanted to do. And all four, you know, my parents got divorced. So I had 2 sets of parents and step parents, and all 4 of them, none of them were doing what in their lives, the thing that they studied in college. Right. And I think that's probably true for more people than not, right? You studied chemistry in college, but now you're a political science professor. You know, yeah. So I had that kind of realization my senior year of high school, and I was like, you know what? It doesn't make sense for me I'm paying for my own school. So if I'm paying for it, I want to make sure I'm getting value out of it. And how can I get value out of it if I don't know what I'm doing there or why I'm there? Mm-hmm. And so I took a year off to try and get closer to that and figure that out.
Well, I'm curious to see how that year off went. I also will say, too, that's one of the reasons why motivations behind the modular degree is that some people want to indulge their curiosity, like they want to learn at something, but in traditional schooling, they're locked into whatever classes they have. And you mentioned Western schools, and I think that's a very prime example of like a very linear mindset. You have to have one job, plan for being in college. Like I remember being pushed to go to college in high school. It's like, I don't really want to. Even back then, I realized I didn't want to per se. But I still tried at first because I was like, that's what I was told to do. And I learned over the years that in Europe, for example, some of the interdisciplinary schools, like for example, you'll be learning biology from the viewpoint of history, or you'll learn law from the viewpoint from like ecology or environmentalism. So you take a very dual approach to it. Or in like China, for example, they have a very divergent school system where they're learning sports and music and mathematics and gaming and all kinds of different things. They're taking a very divergent approach.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, we've talked a little bit about in the past, like how can we influence the education systems to better embrace, you know, neurodiverse thinkers, multipotentialite type brains, nonlinear thinkers, you know, ADHD kids, you know, and and what was interesting is some teachers have said, "What are you talking about? School is the perfect place for kids to go off and explore because they can do anything they want." So I suppose it really depends on the type of school you're at and the type of teachers you have, and you know, and a whole bunch of other factors. I don't think there's like you can make a blanket statement about Western schools or Chinese schools or anything. You know, everything's they're all probably different, but the idea, I think the outcome here is that there are different types of brains in the world, different people who operate, process knowledge, and think and want to explore differently than what is the de facto norm, and that's okay. And we need to create environments where all of those, not just those unique brains, but all the brains can thrive and survive and collaborate and innovate together. And and I think one of the most powerful combinations you can have if you're trying to problem solve, innovate, or come up with an idea is a specialist brain combined with a polymathic brain, right? Because now you've got expertise, but beginner's mind, multi-diverse experiences and thinking that can come towards a unique solution. And I think that's not a lot of people, but some people have said, oh, it's multipotentialites versus specialists, right? Or multi-specialists versus specialists, yeah, generalists versus specialists. And I'm like, no, the world only gets better if we're in it, if we're collaborating, right? We're working together. Yeah.
Well, just touching on a learning point before we move on, but the whole idea of individualized learning, I think, is key for that, for whatever kind of learning way that person has. If they want to be curious about many different things or they want to focus on one thing, catering to that student as best we can. Now with technology, we can. And then you mentioned the combination of specialists with polymathic brains. Bill Gates, I think, is someone who could be defined as a polymath. And he often is really deep level of knowledge in a lot of areas. He was reading books around chemistry and just how biology works when it comes to viruses and how they can all come together. And when he was trying to face a problem, he got a panel of specialists and was going in there and talking to all of them and going toe to toe with them, but still learning from them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great example. I love that whole story. You and I may have watched the same documentary or something about him, where he's going away with his bag of books to read undisturbed. For
like 2 weeks every year.
Yeah, this is great. I love that.
Oh, I want to move on to the next question, but I have one more thing I want to mention to you because it made me think of it. One of my early guests brought this to my attention. A thing called I don't remember this guy's name, but every 7 years he takes off for a year to go. Just do whatever, basically, and go relax. Obviously, you have to save up for that. You can't just, go willy-nilly. But, he plans that out. So just like how Bill Gates plans 2 weeks out of every year to read, this guy plans every 7 years to take a moment to relax and take a step back and explore his life.
I got a creative sabbatical, right?
Yeah.
I love that. There is someone I know who does that. He's a famous graphic designer named Stefan Sagmeister. Is that who you're thinking of?
I don't recall the name. It's been so long, but it sounds nice.
Stefan Sagmeister, he's like a kind of a legend in the graphic design world, and he's known for doing that.
Yeah, the guy I was talking to is a designer and content creator, so he probably was referring to him then.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. All right, so something I ask all my guests, and you kind of touched on it already, but I want to ask you directly, is what is a polymath to you?
What is a polymath to me? I think a polymath is... I would define it very similarly to the definition of multipotentialite that we've been leaning towards throughout our chat, which is someone who's capable and interested in lots of things. Or maybe I should flip that, interested and capable in multiple things, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's short and sweet.
Yeah.
It's good, though, and it's one of those things, too, where it is capable of the deep level of knowledge in areas, and we've mentioned earlier, too, the curiosity aspect.
Yeah, totally. Curiosity is everything. It's interesting you said earlier, curiosity is a skill. I never thought of it that way, right? Because I've always been curious, and I just sort of. It's funny how you assume. We're all guilty of assuming that other people think like us. Sometimes we're shocked and amazed when we find out that they don't. But the idea that definitely there's we wouldn't have to look hard to find people who don't seem to be living a very curious life. But I never thought about that as a skill that could be acquired. I love that.
Well, I do think that a lot of people like us are naturally more predisposed to it. Perhaps we have a more curious brain or something like that, or maybe we weren't necessarily squandered too much as a child, like nature versus nurture too. I think that there's a nurture aspect behind it. Our parents do a lot behind that, indulging that, but there's also nature too. Some of us are more naturally more curious. But there's also the third aspect, how do we train ourselves for it too?
Yeah, the training for me lately has been to do less, or to try and do less, right? Whether that's outsourcing, right? So who, not how, right? Find other people to do things so I can focus on my core strengths and unique abilities, but also to reduce the amount of bigger projects that I'm involved with so that I can actually try and make the ones I do give energy to work better and more quickly.
Yeah. I think this episode we're having here is quite powerful because there's a lot of topics we mentioned here, and the way we're pulling it together is interesting. The guest that I had interviewed that I released this past week, Junaid Ahmed, he talked about constraints and having certain limitations behind what you're talking about when you're creating things or working on something. Just limiting yourself so that you can get it done, too.
Yeah, constraints are great. In advertising, if you ever worked in an advertising creative department or know anything about advertising or watched Mad Men, then the cornerstone of that industry is ideas and innovation. And the way it starts is usually with a creative brief, right? Mm-hmm. A client, wants to sell more widgets. They come to the agency, and the agency goes, "What makes your widgets unique and special and cool?" They take that brief to the creative department, which is where was my domain, and then we get this brief, and what the irony of a creative brief is, most people think that what we want to hear as creative brains is do anything. We don't care. We just want something wonderful, right? Mm-hmm. But something wonderful is so obscure and wide. Like, it's such a big playing field. And also, how do we know, right, when we've done something wonderful? Like, I think it's wonderful, but you might not think so. So how do we get to a place where we can agree? But when you put constraints on that brief and you say it has to be a 15-second TikTok video, and it's got to have, this, you got to hold this thing, and you got to, when people finish watching it after 15 seconds, they have to know A, B, C, D, right? Mm-hmm. You go, okay, cool. Now, what can I do in that seemingly very narrow space, and then go divergent, right? So it's kind of ironic that you have to get convergent first to write a really great brief before you can go divergent and come up with great solutions.
Yeah, just a quick example. I did a talk on the multidisciplinary spectrum earlier this year, and it was limited to 5 minutes. And as someone who likes to talk a lot, had a lot of information to put in there, it was very difficult to constrain that down to that time frame. But I was able to do it well and get people the information across quickly.
Yeah, it's great. Those are awesome. One of my favorite kind of constructs, artificial constructs like that, is a thing called Pecha Kucha. Have you heard of that?
No.
So Pecha, P-E-C-H-A, Kucha, K-U-C-H-A. It's basically what it is Pecha Kucha nights are they'll have, I think it's 7 or 11 people come, and they each get, I think it's like 1 minute, and you get 10 slides and you get 1 minute per slide or something like that. So it's a real artificial construct, but basically you're up there and you got to move through your slides and you got to move through quickly, and time's up when time's up. And you can see how people really struggle sometimes to like condense their message, and other people, condense it so much that it just almost feels like you're wanting more, right? And it's ironically the wanting more is more interesting. Right?
Yeah. Well, that was the format we used, actually. It was Ignite Chicago Talks, or Ignite Talk Chicago's, and it was interesting how, like, you got 20 seconds per slide, or 15 seconds per slide, actually. I think it told me 20 at first, but then they said 15. I was like, oh, I had to make it even shorter, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're a big fan of strategy. Oh, yeah. And so you're kind of a macro picture guy, it seems like to me. What sort of things get you going when it comes to coming up with a strat?
Great strategy for me is about great insight, right? Like, what's the truth? What's the human truth, right? That is undeniable, and that you can use as a platform to leap off and go do great things. So that's what I think. There's a lot of people think strategy is master of the obvious, right? Sometimes when you hear a great strategy, it just feels like, well, duh. But that's usually because they're based in human truth, and I think most great strategies are.
Yeah. I've always loved strategy, and I've spent sometimes too much time building or looking up and learning new strategies rather than actually executing on them or doing something with them, per se.
Interesting. What's an example of that?
Like social media marketing, for example. I started learning about that back in 2012 and learning how to work on certain platforms, and just over the years developed a strategy to create tons of content on multiple different platforms, but really executing on that or finding the right tools for it has been the difficulty.
Right. Okay. I see. I'm glad I asked. So I interpreted your question differently. It was more about like, what are the strategic insights or learnings that you can acquire before you go do something in a marketing context. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, the strategies, the thing about social media strategies, there's a million people convinced that they have the secret sauce. And if you just buy their $1,100 program, they'll blow you. You'll be sure to blow up on Instagram and be, Facebook famous. But, yeah, I mean,
I gave away my strategy for free. I'll just mention that.
Yeah. Okay. And how's that working out?
Well, it's a 7,000 word blog post, and people really love it. So I think that's good.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Great.
Well, I just thought I'd ask because I thought maybe considering, like, I think I got that off your profile or something like that. And the strategy seems like a very fun aspect, being that big picture kind of person and someone who's a visionary, so to speak. That's what I get from you.
Okay. Awesome. I'll take it.
Okay. I didn't know if that would spark anything from you, but either way, what do you mean that you've been beaten by Mount Everest?
I got beaten by Mount Everest. Yeah. So let's see. It was a few years ago. There was a trek organized to go up to Mount Everest Base Camp. And the idea behind it was to raise awareness for young adults with cancer and to get people to donate bone marrow. And the way the whole thing was organized, it was called Everest Rocks. And we had an MTV documentary crew following us. We had a bunch of really awesome like 80s rock stars like Slim Jim from the Stray Cats and the guys from the Fix and the Squeeze and just it was awesome, right? We had all, and so we had this MTV film crew. We had 80s rock stars. We had cancer survivors. We had people who were related to or connected to people who had cancer. Mike Peters, who is the lead singer for a band called The Alarm, is one of the co-founders of that organization. James Chippendale was the other one. James and I both had the same kind of cancer, so we connected over that. And then because I had founded a not-for-profit, when I was going through my cancer journey, I founded a not-for-profit called Prepare to Live. And Prepare to Live was an organization that was designed to use the power of film and community to help young people who are struggling with the disease to kind of find their way through it together. And so because of my involvement with that, I got invited to go on this trek with them. And so, I mean, the thing about base camp is like, if you haven't been to base camp, you're like, oh man, Mount Everest, it sounds incredible, until you realize like on the Chinese side of the Himalayas, they've created a road. So you meet Chinese busloads of tourists coming up. They drive up, so they come up too fast. They all get altitude sickness, so they come out of the bus, they puke, take a photo, get back on the bus, and go down. It's so ridiculous. And the other funny thing is that, you know, like the actual hike to base camp is pretty easy. Like, yeah, sorry, I shouldn't say it's easy. It can be very strenuous at times, but there are like 75-year-old ladies doing it, right? If you go slow and take your time, you won't get sick and you can get up there, right? And so it sounds like a much bigger achievement than it is.
Right.
I probably shouldn't say that because it takes a little bit of the heat out of my story. But
no, but it's still good.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, and it's so beautiful and gorgeous up there. And to do it as part of that Everest Rocks experience was an incredible opportunity that I'm always grateful for. But so when I say I got beaten by Mount Everest, what I mean by that is just before base camp is another camp called Gorup Shep, and the idea was that the musicians were going to try and set a world record for the highest rock concert, not the highest number of people at a rock concert, the highest rock concert. And so they were all going to go up to base camp and perform, and the MTV guys were going to film it, and that was going to be a thing, right? And then I got to Gorup Shep, and I got food poisoning and altitude sickness on the same day. And so I had it coming out both ends, and I was just like, I thought I was going to die. Yeah, I really, really thought I was going to die up there. You know, like, it was just so dire. And,
right.
You know, the guides, like, they see it a million times, you know, so they're not that empathetic or sympathetic. And you see just there in this dirty, like, plywood, you know, box of a structure, like, just feeling terrible. And so I never made it all the way up to base camp. I made it as high as Gorup Shep, but I never made it to base camp. So that's what I mean when I say I was beaten.
I still think it's an interesting story, and I think that too is that going to be in your book.
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. Yeah.
Is there a song that reminds you of that trip?
Oh man, so many. Because the whole experience was around music, right? Like every single rest break, the musicians were getting their instruments out. You know, like they had Sherpas carrying guitars, right? And so literally every single time we stopped to have a snack or just rest, somebody had their guitar out and was playing, and it was being filmed. And so there's so much music that reminds me of that. So Glenn Tilbrook was or is one of the lead singers of a band called Squeeze, and their famous song is tempted by the fruit of another. Tempted by the fruit of another. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you.
And what's interesting was that's the song for which Squeeze is probably most famous, and yet he refused to play it because he didn't write it. It's like the one song that he didn't write. I think this is right. I could forgive me, Glenn, if I get this wrong, but I think that's right. And so because of that, he was really reluctant to kind of play it on the tour because it was being filmed and music licensing and music rights being what they are. So for me, even though I didn't hear that song, that's the song I think that it reminds me of. Yeah,
that's cool. And I'm very curious, what's the story behind your cool looking glasses? Are they blue light glasses or something like that?
These are my nerdy shop specs. Yeah. I know. They made me laugh. You know, when I found out I needed glasses, I was like, I just want to wear glasses that make me laugh. And these did that.
I like how there's a middle piece. I don't know why, but that one little middle piece there, I really just think is unique. I like that.
Yeah. So after I found these, an optometrist that put the lenses in for me explained to me that my eyes are very close together, and the reason most glasses look weird on me is because it looks like I have a third, like, you know, I don't know. It just makes me look cross-eyed if there's a big black thing in there. So
right.
So
that's cool though. I mean, it's an interesting little neat tidbit there. And so, akin to all these life challenges you've talked about, you've beaten cancer, and I love how, and I respect that you've been able to press past that, because I know it's hard. People in my family have had cancer. I've seen what they had to go through. And whether it's a positive or negative thing, what is next for your journey?
What's next for my journey in which
life.
Part of it?
Life.
In life. What's next in life?
Let's
that is a great question. So let's finish where we started, which is the next 5 years, right?
Yes.
Good bookend. Look, right now, what's next for me is I'm really, really excited about the potential of Song Saga, right? What I'm seeing happen now as we've been in market and getting it in the hands of people and starting to hear back from people is just like, I've always believed and felt that this game was, or this experience that people have when they play is powerful and important and good and brings joy, right? Mm-hmm. But now we're getting that feedback from people and they're expressing it back to us, and that is joyful for me, right? And I'm starting to see some really interesting possibilities and opportunities surrounding that game that I always believed were there, some that I never could have imagined that have availed themselves. So certainly that is something that I'm excited to spend time and energy on and explore and see what comes of that. And then writing, right? My my unique ability is writing, and it's probably taken me most of my life to embrace that and accept that for all sorts of different personal and reasons around just negative beliefs around what it means to be a creative professional, and probably other reasons. So for me now, I'm finally at a place in my personal journey and my professional career where I feel like I can actually go after that and go after it hard. So and that's really recent, but I'm really excited about it.
Well, you mentioned this whole episode was very circular, and that's what brings me joy, is when the episode comes together, the themes cross over, the questions cross over, and so you brought me joy from that. And as someone who's polymathic, I think you're cool. I don't think
thanks, man.
Yeah. And I normally mention this after this next thing here, like I have a lot of links for you, a lot of links, because I collected a lot of them. I collect as much as I can when I find somebody, and so I want to ask, where can people find you online, and what's probably the most prudent in this case?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place to kind of springboard out into all the different things I'm involved with is off my personal website, which is EranThomson.com. That's ERAN Thomson, THOMSON, no P, dry Thompson. So yeah, EranThomson.com. You can find everything that you'd want to know about what I'm doing from there.
Perfect. I have it right on the top. And so what could be a call to growth for the audience?
What's a call to growth?
Mm-hmm.
Learn to trust your gut. Learn to knock on the door of intuition and instinct.
It's definitely led me through my life. When there's a gut feeling, I try to chase it if I can.
Yeah. I mean, has trusting your gut ever been the wrong decision for you in your life?
I got in trouble because of my systematic thinking, my gut intuition from what I saw, led me to make decisions that necessarily weren't necessarily good at communicating at that time because I was young, naive, naivete, I guess you could say, and I got in trouble for it, but nothing too serious or something like that.
Well, that's good.
But it's still, I think, trusting my gut led me to learn from those lessons as well. So even though I made a mistake, I was able to learn from it. So again, there's still positive outcomes. So no, there hasn't been a negative case. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we, as a human species, like we got this brain and we tend to want to use it. But so many people I think can become disconnected from their own intuition and instinct. And it's probably the most valuable asset we have. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that would be my number one piece of advice. Learn to trust your gut.
Learn to trust your gut. I love it. And so once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Eran Thomson, Dry Thomson, no P, on the Polymath Polycast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Dustin. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
You too.
Cheers.
That was great. Yeah.